What is Title V and what do I need to know about it? That is the question almost every seller I work with asks me as they're getting their house ready to go on the market. In this video, I'm going to explain what it is, what you need to know as a home seller, and what happens if it fails the inspection. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Sylvester with RE/MAX Platinum here in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and today we're talking about Title V and septic systems. Septic systems is probably the most least glamorous part of the selling process, but an absolutely necessary item on your checklist when you're selling a home in Massachusetts. So what is Title V? So Title V is a Massachusetts regulation that went into effect in March of 1995. Essentially, it's a regulation that governs the construction and the maintenance of a septic system. It requires a homeowner to have the septic system inspected by a licensed inspector and have a passing certificate prior to having a deed transfer. The inspections are good for 2 years. If you pump the system every year, the inspection is actually good for 3 years. When you have a septic inspection, the licensed inspector will have a number of items that they will check. They're going to check the components of the system. They're going to check the water and waste levels. They're going to look for signs of failure and cracks in the tanks and the holding tanks. They're going to make sure that it adheres to local code, and they're going to check for blockages and filters. Now, it's important to know that from the state level, the Title V has their certain regulations, but the local Board of Health can add regulations on top of the state regulations. So for example, in the town of Plymouth, cesspools are an automatic failure. If you have a cesspool, if you have an older property, I had just ran into this with a particular client that had a home that was built in the 1950s. Because they had a cesspool and the septic system was never upgraded, it doesn't even matter if the system is working and functioning properly. It is an automatic failure according to the local Board of Health rules. So what happens when you're getting your house ready to sell? What do you need to know? The state requires the septic to be inspected no more than 2 years prior to the deed transfer or 6 months after the deed transfer due to inclement weather. As I mentioned before, the certificate is good for 2 years, and it can be extended to 3 years if you pump it annually. Now, I always advise my homeowners, as soon as they decide that they definitely want to sell, whether it be 6 months, 9 months in advance, before they're actually ready to put the house on the market, call and have your Title V inspected right away. It's better to know now, it's better to know early on if there are any issues so you can take care of those issues rather than get to the point of sale, have the Title V, and then have an unexpected surprise either by an extended timeline because now you need a repair, or worse, an unexpected expense. Now, once the septic system has been inspected, the inspector will then complete a standard Title V state-mandated form, and they will send a copy to the homeowner and they send a copy to the Board of Health. The Board of Health maintains copies of all Title V's completed, as well as the original Certificate of Compliance, which is the certificate that the Board of Health signs off on when the septic system was originally installed. Now, when you get that Title V report, a copy should go to your agent. That copy is then presented to the buyer who eventually will buy the house. The buyer will review the report to understand exactly what type of septic system is on the property that they're buying, but also to give to their lender. Most conventional loans, FHA, VA loans will require a passing Title V certificate before they will approve the mortgage. Now, the law requires that the property have a passing Title V when you transfer the property, but the law doesn't stipulate who takes care of the Title V. Now, you do have some options with this. Typically, the homeowner will take care of the Title V. Most situations, the homeowner will take care of inspecting the property, inspecting the Title V rather, having that system repaired if necessary. And mostly that's because if the buyer is getting a mortgage through a conventional mortgage or FHA or VA mortgage, that lender will require that system to be up to code, and the buyer can't pay for it. But if you have a property that is being sold as is, maybe it's a property that needs a lot of work, it's a renovation property, a property that will need maybe demolition or just need a lot of work that might attract contractors, then the buyer, a contractor that comes into the table and offers cash, could buy the property as is, and now it's their responsibility to update that septic system once they take possession. That brings me to the third point, is what happens if the septic system fails? Now, there are a few things that you need to understand about the failure of a Title V. Number one, a failure doesn't automatically mean the whole system needs to be replaced. Sometimes an inspector will give it a conditional pass, which means it might need a very minor repair. Maybe it needs a filter changed or something of that nature, where the homeowner can make that repair, and as soon as that repair is done, it is officially a passed Title V. That's called a conditional pass. Now, the example I gave you before with the contractor purchasing the property, if a buyer is able to purchase the property, meaning their lender does not require a passing Title V, if a buyer can purchase it as is with a failed Title V, the buyer now has 2 years to make that property up to regulations. So they can buy the property without and transfer the deed with a failed Title V, but it is now their responsibility. They have 2 years, according to the state code, to bring that property up to Title V regulations. So the Title V has failed, you're going to the repair. What is involved in a Title V repair? The first step is a perk test. So what will happen is you will call an engineer. The engineer will then schedule a perk test. They literally dig a hole in the ground, pour water in, measure actually the saturation rate of that water. The Board of Health official will come and witness that, and that is how they will determine where the new system will go. Sometimes the system will go on the same property if you have a small lot. Sometimes the old system has to be removed, new fill has to be brought in, and then they can actually put the new system in. But that perk test is very important because that is the very first step to determine exactly where the system is going. Once the engineer knows where the system is going, then they can actually design the plans. The engineer is the one that actually will determine how big the system will need to be, where the system's going to go, what type of system is necessary, depending on what the water table is, where the water table is, where the property is located, what the setbacks are, size of the lot, variances, and so forth. Once those plans are completed with an engineer, typically that can take 2-3 weeks, then the engineer will bring those plans to the Board of Health. The local Board of Health will then review the plans, and if they don't have any issues with the way the plans are drawn, they will approve the plans. Now, once you have approved plans, then you can find out, okay, how much is this system actually going to cost? A system in Massachusetts, particularly the South Shore and the Plymouth area, could run anywhere from $12,000, $15,000 up to $40,000, depending on where you are in the town and the soil consistency and the size of the lot. And the only way to know where you fit in that range is to get those completed engineer plans in your hand. Now you can go to 2 or 3 installers, contractors, excavators, to find out exactly how much the system is going to cost for the installation. Now, once you have the approved plans, you've sent them out to several contractors, you have several bids, you pick a particular contractor that you're happy with, now you schedule for that installation of that septic system. And the actual installation of the septic system usually is less than a week from start to finish, from the time they bring the first backhoe in to the time they're done, and maybe they can put down loam, seed, depending on the time of the year. Usually that process is less than a week for the whole actual installation. So an overview of the time frame, typically on a perk test, takes about, depending again on the time of year, a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks. The engineering is another couple of weeks. And then the scheduling the contractor, again, just the scheduling part, can take also a couple of weeks, depending on the time of year. So start to finish, especially this time of year, springtime, we don't have to deal with weather conditions as much. However, the market being very busy right now, these installers are very busy, so it tends to be a little bit of a longer time frame. It could take 60 days, maybe a little longer, from the time you make that first phone call to the time you have your certificate of compliance for the installation of the septic. Now, lastly, what are your options for installing the septic? Financially, it's a big obligation when you're talking $15,000, $20,000, $30,000. And many of my homeowners maybe don't necessarily have the cash flow to pay for that out of pocket, but they have equity to cover it. So there are definitely some options that you can consider as far as how to make this happen so that you can get the house sold. Now, the best case scenario is, if financially feasible, have the system installed prior to the property going on the market. If you can financially handle having the system installed, that's the best way to have it all taken care of. So that's one less thing that you have to deal with once you get a buyer. But if you can't do that, there are a couple of other options. The first option would be to work with an engineer and a contractor, an excavator, that would be willing to get paid at closing. I would check with your agent on this. Usually, I know I personally have relationships with local engineers, local excavators, where I can make an arrangement with them to wait until closing to get paid. Not all engineers and contractors are willing to do that or able to do that. Some will ask for a small amount of money up front, maybe the cost of the local Board of Health fees, maybe the cost of the backhoe for the Perk test, just to get them to the closing, but then they're willing to wait until the closing of the property to get the bulk of the money and payment. Now, another option is a holdback. I haven't seen this option as much. It's not as popular of an option, but definitely is still an option to consider. And basically what a holdback is the closing attorney will hold 1.5 to 2 times the cost of the septic system in escrow after the closing. So the property will close as normal, as scheduled, and then after the closing, the seller will have that property, have that septic system installed, and the money will be released from the attorney to pay that contractor. Now, the tricky part about this is the buyer's lender. Not all lenders will allow that holdback. They want to see that completed, installed, Title V. The other drawback and the other negative is if this homeowner is looking to move into another property, that's going to be money, that's going to be equity that you're going to lose that you can't tap into to make your next purchase. It's money that's tied up, for 60, 90 days after the transaction. So that's an overview of the Title V process. If you have any questions about Title V regulations, or about your particular situation with your Title V, please don't hesitate to ask. And if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button. I post videos weekly on real estate, community, and home tech topics. And make sure to hit the bell icon so you're notified when those videos drop. We'll see you next time.